God, we thank you for this time. We thank you for this place. Lord, we thank you for your presence, for your mercy, your grace. God, in a world that is going crazy, news that is scary, in the busy, hectic days of our lives, God, knowing that you were there for us, knowing all that you have done for us, God, that we can stand on you. God, you are enough. Lord, I don't need anything else. God, I thank you for your presence in my life. And Lord, for your presence in this place. Lord, let your spirit flood this room. Remove all distraction right now, God, as we worship you. righteousness. God, we hunger and we thirst for that day. God, you're so good, and we'll never fully know why you would do such a thing for us. God, but I'm so thankful that you did. God, without you, I would be nothing, be nobody. I would have no hope. God, but because of what you've done, I have victory. Called a child of God. And no matter how desperate things may seem, I have the hope of eternal life in Christ Jesus. Thank you, God. Lord, speak to us now through your word.
Go ahead, and if you have a Bible, grab it. Go to Luke chapter 6. We're going to be in Luke chapter 6. If you don't know where that is, you can kind of open 2/3 of the way through your Bible. You'll end up in Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and we'll be in Luke. It's the easiest way to find it. Luke chapter 6. If you don't have a Bible that you can call your own, like if you don't own one, please let me know. I would love to get you one so that you can follow along with us as we go through these verses every week. If you're not bringing it, make sure that you do that so that you can follow along in these verses every week. We would love for you to do that as well. But if you got a Bible, go to Luke chapter 6. That's where we're going to be. Now, the song that we just sang talks about something that very few of us, if any of us, are familiar with. It talks about something called a cornerstone. And that's the song that we're looking at tonight, Cornerstone. What do we celebrate when we sing the song Cornerstone? So it only makes sense that we would learn what a cornerstone is so that we can know exactly what we're singing about, right? A cornerstone, if you aren't familiar, is the very first stone laid when construction of a building begins, okay? Like a building, not necessarily a house, but when a building is being built, the cornerstone is the first stone laid. And that stone determines everything else about the building. So when they place that stone on the work site, it tells them which way the building is going to face. It determines how long it's going to be, how tall it's going to be. It determines the size of the windows, the size of the doorways. Everything about the building is based off of the cornerstone. So when we sing Christ alone, cornerstone, what we are singing is that Christ is our foundation that determines the rest of our life. Christ is the one that we base everything off of. We're singing that our whole life is built on Jesus. That's your first blank. When we sing the song Cornerstone, we're celebrating being able to build our life on a solid, stable foundation. When we sing Cornerstone, we celebrate having a solid, stable foundation. Again, that's why it says things like, my hope is built on nothing less. My hope isn't built on anything besides Jesus. It says, I dare not trust the sweetest friend. Which means I'm not going to put my trust in anything else that looks like it's going to hold me up. I'm just going to put my entire trust in Jesus alone. That's what we celebrate when we sing this song. But I think if all of us in this room were honest, that's not really true for us. Like if we were to look at our life and think about what we're building our life on, we would say that what we just sang isn't true for us, because most of us aren't putting our hope on him. Not completely. We're not wholly leaning or completely putting our trust in his name. Most of us are trusting in other things. We're putting our hope in other things to give us a solid, stable foundation, to give us a solid, stable, satisfying life. We're trusting in our good looks, trusting in our personality, trusting in our creativity, our intelligence, our athleticism. We're trusting in the huge number of friends that we have or how many followers we have on social media. We're trusting in the things that we own, the kind of house that we live in, the way that we dress. That's what we trust in to give us a solid, stable, satisfying life. If it wasn't those things, then we wouldn't be trying so hard to have all of them, trying so hard to be good at all of them. And that, not all of us are putting our hope and our trust in those things, because some of us don't like our life very much at all. Like, if we're going to be honest, life is rough for us. We don't dig it. We have a hard time with it. We deal with a lot of different things. And so some of us put our hope and put our trust in other things just to keep us solid and stable and to satisfy us while we just try and make it through each and every day. And so our hope and our trust lie in things like drugs or alcohol or self-harm. That's what we're putting our hope and our trust in. And there are still others of us who aren't about any of that stuff, but man, we really pride ourselves on being a good person. We pride ourselves on the good things that we do every day. We pride ourselves on being better than the next guy at how we live our life, how we treat people, the things that we're after. Those are the things that we put our hope and that we put our trust in. And typically what we do when we're believers is we kind of just throw Jesus somewhere into the mix and all that. And so instead of building our entire life on Jesus, he just kind of becomes a wreath on the door of our life. He's in there, but he's not what our life is built on. But Luke 6:49 tells us that doing that is like a person who builds a house right on the ground without a foundation. When the floods sweep down against the house, it will collapse into a heap of ruins. Jesus says this, and he says that building your life on anything besides him, building your life on anything besides him as the cornerstone, isn't going to hold up. It's not going to hold up at all. So if we're going to sing a song about Jesus being the cornerstone of our life, if we're going to sing a song about him being the only thing that gives us a solid, stable, satisfying life, then we need to learn to build our life on it, right? Like, because that's the only plausible conclusion. Again, I've told you before, my answer is always, that sounds great, Pastor, but how do I do that? How do I do that? How do I build my life on Jesus? How do I make Jesus the cornerstone of my life? Well, Luke chapter 6, verse 46 is going to outline all of that for us. So go to Luke chapter 6. We're going to be in verse 46. Now, this actually, in the timeline of Jesus' life, best is pulled from Matthew. So in Matthew, in chapter 4, you have Jesus being tempted by the devil for 40 days and nights in the desert. And then in Matthew chapter 5, you have what we call the Sermon on the Mount, right? And it's just a big fancy way of saying the place where Jesus preached probably his greatest sermon ever, right? So like I preach every week for about 30 minutes and have 3 to 4 points, okay? Jesus preached all day that day and had like 19 points. You can, again, read all of it, Matthew chapter 5 through Matthew chapter 7. And so he's on the side of this mountain. He's got thousands of people gathered around him listening to him teach, and he's laying out all of his commands and all of his guidelines to have that solid, stable, satisfying life. And then he ends it by saying this. Look at Luke chapter 6, verse 46. So why do you keep calling me Lord, Lord, when you don't do what I say? I will show you what it's like when someone comes to me, listens to my teaching, and then follows it. It is like a person building a house who digs deep and lays the foundation on solid rock. When the floodwaters rise and break against that house, it stands firm because it is well built. So Jesus says that anyone who builds their life on everything that he just taught them is going to have a solid, stable, satisfying life. They're going to have a solid, stable, satisfying life. He says you've got to dig down deep. You've got to get past the clay. You've got to get past the topsoil, all that stuff. You've got to find the bedrock, because that's the first layer of solid earth. You've got to get down there and you build your house on that. He's using an analogy. It's an analogy that they would understand. The area that Jesus is teaching in is an area where it flooded a whole lot. The ground wasn't particularly soft, and so it didn't soak up a lot of water, and they didn't get rain there very often. So when it did rain, it rained a lot at one time, and it usually caused a lot of flash flooding. And so when Jesus talks about this flood coming against them, what he's really talking about is the day of judgment, right? He says when we all go to heaven, there's going to be a day where we stand in front of God, and his judgment is going to come against you like a flood. He's going to judge your life. And literally what he's saying with this flood analogy is that when you stand before God, if you've built your life on anything besides what I'm teaching you, it literally won't hold any water. It won't hold any water before God. It won't satisfy him. It won't meet his requirements, and it will collapse under the weight of his judgment. But then he also again tells them that they have to dig down deep to get to this bedrock. That's a very specific analogy too, okay? Because again, nowadays, every single building, if it is built well, is built on a concrete foundation. The first thing that they do when they build any building is they go in and they mark out the spot that the building is going to be, and then they lay a flat concrete slab. That makes sure that the building is level, everything. Make sure that that building has a solid, stable foundation. That has been going on for literally hundreds of thousands of years. Because back during this time, they did the same thing, only it wasn't concrete. It was slabs of clay and straw and mud. And so just like we have workers come in and pour concrete, they would have workers come in and make these giant slabs, right? But Jesus is saying, don't call in any workers. Don't bring other people in to do it. You dig down deep to the bedrock. That's very important. There's a specific reason why he says that. He's like, because I don't even want you trusting in any man-made foundation. I want you trusting in a God-made foundation. Because again, who made the earth? God did. Who made the bedrock? God did. So he's saying, don't mark out your own slab and have other people make it. Don't try to make it yourself. Build your life on a God-made foundation. And that's what he wraps up this entire Sermon on the Mount with is, hey, if you're going to have a solid, stable, satisfying life that's going to hold water when you stand in front of God, that's going to be able to stand up against the flood of his judgment, you've got to build on a God-made foundation. And then he tells them how exactly they're going to do that. He says, let me show you what it's like when someone comes to me, listens to what I say, and then follows it. Those are the three things that we're going to follow for this outline. If we want to have a solid, stable, satisfying life, we have to do those three things. The first thing is one, follow him, which means, or come to him. That means put him in charge. We have to come to him. That means put him in charge. That's your next blank. He starts verse 46. So when he gets to his conclusion of his sermon, the first sentence of his conclusion is, why do you call me Lord when you don't do what I say? Okay, again, Jesus is very specific. He uses the term Lord because Lord means master. Lord means person in charge. And so he's asking all these people who are following him, why do you call me your Lord? Why do you call me your master? Why do you claim that I'm in charge of your life when you don't live like I'm in charge of your life? And he's using this analogy that's very common to them. He says, come to me. If you really, don't say I'm in charge if I'm not really in charge. If you really want to build your life on a solid, stable foundation, you have to come to me. You have to put me in charge. That when he says come to me, he's using an illustration that they would know well. Because back during that time, when they had all their religious leaders that were called rabbis, what they would do is basically like we do when we're looking for a church, right? Like they find a preacher that they like, the way that he teaches, the way that he speaks, all kinds of things like that, and they go, I'm going to go to this church. That's usually how it happens, right? Well, it's the same thing back then. They would find a rabbi that they liked. They would find a rabbi that they wanted to learn from, and they would go to him and they would put him in charge of their life. They would say, tell me what I need to know and lead me like I need to be led. And so when Jesus says, come to me, he's using that illustration. He's like, come to me and put me in charge of your life. If you want a solid, stable foundation, if I'm going to be the cornerstone of your life, then you have to put me in charge. And that's what he's telling us to do. We're going to make Jesus the cornerstone of our life. If we're going to build our hope on him and trust in nothing else, then we've got to put him in charge. And that means getting rid of what is currently in charge. Jesus is going to be in charge. We've got to get rid of what is currently in charge. And immediately, I know you start thinking about who is actually in charge of your life. Well, mom and dad are in charge of me. I don't know how I'm going to get rid of them. They pay for a lot of stuff and feed me. My teachers are in charge, and I would like to get rid of some of them, but I can't. That's where your mind goes, right? Some of you are smarter. You're like, my friends influence me. Social media influence me. Am I letting that be in charge? I'll be honest with you. None of that is right. It's close, but it's not right. The number one thing that is in charge of all of our lives is our desires. Number one thing in charge of all of our lives is our desires. Namely, our desire to get what we want and to avoid what we're afraid of. When I was in high school, I was consumed with my own desires. Literally determined every single thing that I did. Like, I wanted friends. I wanted people to like me. I wanted to be accepted. And I was afraid of rejection. And so, fitting in with a group of people determined a lot for me. Determined how I talked. Determined how I dressed. Determined the kinds of things that I was interested in, the kind of music that I listened to, the kind of TV shows that I watched. I wanted to fit in, so I had to know about all of the things that they were interested in, and so I became interested in all of those things as well. It literally determined everything that I did. What I spent my money on, what I spent my free time doing, wanting to have friends, wanting to get friends and be liked and be accepted, and my fear of rejection controlled everything. It's in charge. It's what determined everything for me. It was the same when it came to dating. Again, I wanted to have a girlfriend, and I was afraid of being alone, and so I did what I had to do to get a girlfriend. I played sports and I worked out so I could look a certain way so that girls would like me. When I took them out on dates, I dressed a certain way and went to certain places and said certain things so that they would like me. I got them gifts and all just so that I could get what I wanted, which was a girlfriend, and avoid being alone. When it came to my parents, I wanted to do what I wanted to do, even if it broke their rules, but I didn't want to get in trouble if I broke their rules. And so that led to me lying and hiding things from them. My desires, getting what I wanted and avoiding what I was afraid of, controlled everything about me. And I'm guessing it controls everything about you as well. That's what's in charge. That is what is steering your life right now. Everything that we do is built on getting what we want and avoiding what we're afraid of. The rest of the world calls that following your heart or doing what makes you happy. But that is not a solid, stable, satisfying foundation to build on. Because that foundation shifts every time you want something new. It shifts every time something gets old. And it can be taken down with one bad word from someone against you or one unexpected event in your life. When something happens that we can't control, that doesn't go the way that we want it to, and taps into our fears, we freak out and we lose it. That's not a stable foundation. It can't withstand anything. And it's not satisfying either, because you're chasing whatever your desires move towards, right? So you're constantly running. You're constantly trying to get, instead of being filled and satisfied, you're constantly working to get things. It's a terrible foundation to build on. So Jesus says, if you want a solid, stable foundation, I've got to be the cornerstone of your life. You have to put me in charge. Instead of working so hard to get what you want, trust me to give you what I know that you want. That's one of the most beautiful things about the Bible. The Bible says that God created us. He designed us with our desires in our hearts. The Bible says that He knows exactly what we want before we even have to ask Him. And it also says that if we delight ourselves in the Lord, if we love Him and we put Him in charge, it says He will give us the desires of our heart. So if we trust Jesus with what we want, He's going to give us what we want. And instead of trying to avoid the things that we're afraid of, we turn those over to Jesus. And we trust Him to protect us from those things. Because again, there's nothing that's outside of God's control. There's no mess that He can't fix. There's no sickness that He can't heal. There's no brokenness that He can't mend. The Bible says, cast all of your cares on the Lord, for He cares for you. It says, Jesus says, come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden. Come to me, all who have tons of problems and things that they're afraid of, and give them to me, and I will give you rest. I will give you rest from that worry. I will give you rest from that fear. And that never changes. That is a solid, stable foundation that always fills us up and never falls down. So if we want Jesus to be the cornerstone of our life, then we have to put Him in charge. We have to come to Him and we have to put Him in charge. The second way is to put a high value on what He says. That's your next blank. Put high value on what He says. He says, come to me and listen to me. And when He says, listen to me, He's talking about making Him the source of truth in our lives. That's what He's explaining to the people that He's talking to, because their world wasn't much different than our world. The only thing that makes our world different from that world back then is technology. Our cultures are basically the same. Because again, not only did they have religious leaders speaking into their lives, they had these rabbis, people that were supposed to be leading them to God, but actually weren't, which is why Jesus gets on to them so much. But they also had the same things that we have. They had their cultural influencers, people that were popular. They had celebrities that cast out their opinion on everything. They had politicians that cast out their opinion on everything. They had all these different news sources and things like we have that cast out their opinion on everything. And people did back then exactly what we do now. We just pick our favorite. We go, I trust you more than I trust anyone else. And we take everything else everyone else says and we just compare it to who we trust the most. That's exactly what they did. And so when they heard about something, when they heard about social justice issues or political issues or any other issues, when it came to how to live the best life and have the most satisfying life, they just took whatever they agreed with and compared everything else to it. And were like, I don't agree with this because it doesn't line up with what they said. I don't agree with this because it doesn't fit with what all of my friends are talking about. That's exactly what they did. That is exactly what we do. And Jesus is saying, if you want a solid, stable foundation, then I have to be the source of truth in your life. You have to put a high value on what I say and compare everything else that you hear against it. Because He is God. He is the creator of all things. He is the designer of how life is supposed to be lived. He is the answer to all of our questions. And so if we want to build our life on a solid foundation of truth that never changes, we've got to build it on Him, because He is the only thing that we can trust. Let's talk some more about Aaron's dating in high school. Want to? You guys seem to get a good count of that. So when I was in high school, me and my group of friends, of course, when we were freshmen, sophomore, even into junior year, our favorite thing to do was sit around at lunchtime or before school or after school and just talk about girls. So we're not any different than most of you guys, right? Like, you sit around, you do it differently. Like, we would sit there and watch them walk by and go to class and stuff. You just look at them on your phone, but it's the same thing.
Thank you, Aaron.
Again, don't act like I don't know you. But that's what we would do. And we would sit around and talk about who was single, who we liked, who we were interested in, who was dating who. We were talking about who were waiting to break up with whoever they're with so that we could try and date them. We did all of that. I was a typical high school guy that hung out with typical high school guys. And we would talk to each other about what we thought each other should do to get the person that we were interested in. And it was a terrible system because all of us were single. You got a bunch of single guys telling each other how not to be single. Terrible plan.
Come on, Aaron. I thought you got all girls. Come on.
Nothing changed for me, honestly. No, you are wrong. I love Star Wars, and until I got married was a terrible dresser. So, not a lot going my way. Nothing changed for me in that department, though, until I started talking to my parents about what it meant to have a real relationship. Because they had been married for 2 decades at that point. Started talking to my grandparents about how their relationship started. They'd been married for 50 years at that point. And that's when the relationship stuff started to change for me. Why? Because I went to somebody that actually knew what they were talking about. You laugh. You do it every day. You get online and you look at TikTok and you look at Instagram and you watch YouTube videos and you let other people who have no idea what life is for and what it's supposed to be built on tell you what life is for and what it's supposed to be built on. It's blind leading the blind. But again, Jesus is God in the flesh. He is the creator of life. The Bible says that He created all things, and all things were created for Him. And so if we want to build our life on a solid foundation, on the truth of what life is all about, then He is the source that we have to go to. We don't do that. Typically what we do is we take what Jesus says and we compare it to what everyone else says. That's dumb. That's like asking your classmate for the answers to a test. Most of them don't know them.
Well, actually,
Well, in that analogy, the ones that do know them are Christians. So at least go to somebody who knows the person that knows the answers, right? We've got to, hey, listen. See, you're not even listening to me. If you want a solid foundation of truth for your life, then you've got to listen to Jesus. If He's going to be the cornerstone of everything, then you have to put a high value on what He says. Not just a higher value than some of the things in your life, but the highest value over all the things in your life. We see every day opinions change. We see facts change every day, which if they were real facts wouldn't change at all, because that's not how facts work. Truth never changes. Facts never change. We live in a world where facts and truth are determined by feelings, and feelings can change at the drop of a hat. And yet, we're supposed to believe those things. We're supposed to trust in those things. We're supposed to put the hope and faith of our future in this life and our eternity in those things. we want a solid, stable foundation, we have to build it on the truth of Christ, because that truth never changes. Jesus always feels the same about everything. He likes what he likes, he loves what he loves, and he hates what he hates. And that never changes. And if we disagree with it, if anybody else disagrees with it, that's our problem, not his. So if we want to build our life on a solid, stable foundation, we have to put a high value on what he says. We have to just come to him and listen to him, and then we have to put it into practice. That's your next point. We have to put it into practice. He says, come to me, listen to me, and then he says, follow me. Follow me. Again, he's going back and drawing off of this culture of rabbis. Again, what people would do is they would go to a rabbi and they would say, they would put them in charge, lead me, tell me everything I need to do for my life, and then they would play a lifelong game of follow the leader with them. That's exactly what they would do. They would literally mimic everything they did. They would play copycat with every single thing that they did. And I mean everything. Like when kids are trying to be annoying to their parents and copying everything they do, like it was just like that. Hold cups the same way to drink. Walk the same way. Wear the same clothes. They would even talk with the same accent. And they would walk so closely behind their rabbi that the dust from his sandals as they walked, the sand as they walked would fly back and cover the feet of the person behind them. That's how close they were. Like when you're walking down the hallway too close behind somebody and you step on the heel of their shoe and they yank their foot out of it. It's the most annoying thing ever. It was a game that we played in high school. I hated it. People would walk up behind me and yank my foot out of my shoe by stepping on the heel. It's the worst. That's how closely they would follow these rabbis. They would play this lifelong game of follow the leader, and they would literally put into practice everything that they were learning from their rabbi. Jesus is telling us to do the same thing. If we're going to build a stable foundation for our life, if we're going to build one that is solid and satisfying, then we've got to put into practice the way that he has shown us how we're supposed to live. We've got to play a lifelong game of follow the leader with him and do everything he did just the way that he did it. If you don't know by now, I really like to fish, like a lot.
Oh, what?
A lot. I spend literally all my time, like, yeah, I've got my fishing shirt on, got my Bass Pro hat, love it, official, and gang. But listen, I started fishing when I was really, really young with my dad. We would go out every weekend and fish. And then I went to college and I quit. And then I got married and I just never picked it back up again because I just assumed that Kristen didn't want to go fishing with me, which was bad because she does. But when the pandemic hit, I had nothing else to do. I decided to get back into it. And it was completely different from what I grew up doing. There were lures that I hadn't seen before. There were techniques that I hadn't seen before. And so when I first got back into it, like it was terrible. I was terrible at it. And I was getting frustrated because fishing's not fun if you're not catching anything. I would go out, spend hours, and just not catch anything. And so I did what most of us do when we want to learn how to do something. I looked it up on YouTube. And I went and I found all of these guys that were really good at fishing, who knew how to use all these lures that I didn't know how to use. And I would literally go and get those same things and go to the pond or to the lake and do exactly what I saw them do in the video. And I'm not just listening to what they're telling me to do. I'm literally watching how they do it. And I'm trying to mimic it down to the nth degree. And now I'm pretty dang good at fishing.
Yes, sir. That's what I'm talking about.
And I enjoy that. Fishing has become more fun for me. I've become successful at what I'm doing. But that's because I went to an expert. I saw what they were doing, and I put it into practice. If we want to have a successful life, if we want life to be satisfying, and we've got to go to the life expert, the one who created it, we've got to go to Jesus, and we've got to look at what he did, and we've got to mimic it down to the nth degree. We've got to play copycat. We've got to put what he shows us into practice. Because that's the only way we're going to succeed. Otherwise, we're going to spend our whole life building and never living. Jesus is the one who knows how life should be lived, knows the best way to live it, knows how to get the most out of it. And if we want that, we have to put into practice how he's shown us we should live. Otherwise, we will constantly be building on shaky ground. And that's what all of this means for you. If you are building your life on anything but Jesus, if anything besides Jesus is the cornerstone for your life, if it is directing everything that you do and determining every path that you take and every decision that you make, you're building a life that isn't strong enough to hold up your expectations for it and will collapse the moment anything comes against it. Building your life on anything besides Jesus is like trying to build a house of cards in the middle of a hurricane. It's not going to make it. Because nothing besides him is solid or stable or satisfying. And so maybe what you need to do tonight is everything that we've been talking about. Maybe you need to put him in charge of your life. Or put a high value on what he says. Or begin putting into practice the way that he's shown you how to live. Because I'm going to be honest, when I was your age, I didn't do any of that stuff. Now that I'm older and have started to do it, I really wish I'd started so much sooner. I would have wasted a lot less time building a shack. And a lot more time building the kingdom that I'm a part of. Would have spent a lot more time building on things that I actually wanted, instead of things that I thought would satisfy me. So maybe that's what you need to do is put him in charge. Maybe you've never put him in charge ever before in your entire life, but you realize tonight that what you're after, what you're building your life on, what you've put your hope and your trust in isn't gonna hold for you. It's not gonna make it. And you want to put him in charge for the first time, please let me or any other adult that's in this room know that. We would love to tell you how to do that. That's what changed everything for me. But maybe you've been a Christian for a long time and you love Jesus. You like what he says. You think the things that he did are cool, but you've never given yourself over to any of that. You've never really put him in charge and let him lead you. You've never really put a high value on his words. There's always been some kind of doubt there. You've never really put into practice the way that he has shown you how to live. And maybe that's what you need to do tonight. My motto for the year with some of this stuff has been, let's just do it and see what happens. When it comes to God, let's just do it and see what happens, right? Maybe that's what you need to do is, you know what? I've never done this before. Let's just do it and see what happens. I promise you it's going to work out well. It has so far for me. If you want a solid, stable, satisfying life that will stand through any situation and that will hold water when you stand in front of God, and Jesus has to be the cornerstone of your life. If you want your life to be everything that God created it to be, you've got to make Jesus the cornerstone of your life. Here's your last blank. You ready? If I want a life that won't fall, I have to make Jesus the cornerstone of it all. If I want a life that won't fall, I have to make Jesus the cornerstone of it all. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I love you, and I thank you for these students. My prayer is that they would do everything that we talked about tonight. That they would put you in charge, put a high value on what you say, and put into practice the way that you've shown them to live. And that they would start to experience the life that you created them to experience. If there's anyone in here who doesn't have that life, don't let them leave tonight until they get it. God, let us stop building houses without foundations. Let us stop trusting in man-made plans. Let us dig down deep and build on solid rock. Let's put our hope and our trust in you. In your name I pray. Amen.